It's a little high.
Little high.
A little high.
Okay. I'm going to hold this up to you while you talk because for some reason it's a little blurry.
Oh.
Okay, we are here and today we are going to be discussing the prophetess Miriam, and Rachel is going to introduce us to Miriam.
Hi, everyone. I'm so delighted to have you all here and to elevate our home with Torah study. It's just such an honor, and I'm so grateful to Deborah, my teacher, my mentor, my dear friend, for giving me this opportunity to share a few words. So Deborah mentioned that that nothing is by accident in our world. So when we were
Dirty
talking about
laundry.
the different women that we would speak about, we decided
So I'll
to.
leave it down.
And we really didn't realize how much we would need to tap into her strength when we were planning this, even a week or two ago, what our world would look like now. So, thinking about Miriam and her beautiful qualities of strength brings me to sort of starting out with her childhood. We know that she was a prophetess, our first prophetess, right? Female prophetess. And when she was a young girl, she had a prophecy that her parents would give birth to a child who would become the savior of the Jewish nation. And we know also during that time that it was a very difficult time for the Jewish people, which we're all painfully familiar with now. And her parents had initially decided during that time there was a decree that all Jewish baby boys would be thrown into the Nile, and her parents decided at that time that they would separate, that they would, I guess, divorce at that time or separate and not have children. And her father, who was the leaders of the Jewish people, encouraged the other people to do the same. And Miriam used her strength and her conviction to stand up to her parents, to her father, and to say, when you are separating, not only are you denying our nation of having boys, but you're denying our nation of having girls. And she, as a young girl, I think age of 5 or 6, she said these things to her parents, which is such a strong thing to say. I can't even imagine saying that to my parents, let alone having that type of prophecy. And her parents listened to her and they got back together. And that's why they were able to have Moshe, to have Moses, which is thank you Hashem for Moses. So just again, as a young girl, she's tapping into her strength. And in addition, so they have Moses, and still the edict is happening, and it's becoming clear that the Egyptians are going to be hunting for Moses, and they decide that they will need to put him in the basket and put him in the Nile. Miriam's watching during this time to make sure and to be careful that her prophecy will come true. She's watching out for Moshe. He's in the water. She sees that Pharaoh's daughter, Batia, picks him up, and she is the one who suggests that Yocheved, her mother and Moshe's mother, be the one to nurse Moshe. So she is using her strength and also her conviction and her creativity, her intuition, which we know what that feels like as Jewish women, to have that sort of intuition, that she should suggest that Yocheved be the one to nurse her actual son. But Batya thought she was just a nursemaid. So boy, am I thankful that we have these incredible foremothers to tap into, and that every time we learn about them, it's our current lives are so their lessons are so relevant to our current lives. It seems like no matter when we sit down to study any Torah lesson, and certainly to learn from our foremothers, that we just can apply it directly to what's happening. So I'm hopeful, and my prayer would be that we can tap into Miriam's strength as we go through these difficult times, and as we sort of balance between the joy and the pride of and the strength of being a Jew, and also the difficulty of the times that we go through. So I hope that we will tap into her strength, and I will turn it over to dear Devora to continue Miriam's story.
Okay.
Yasher Kohen.
Yasher Koach. Okay, beautiful. So what I'm going to do now, that was so beautifully said, I'm going to first say a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh b'dvaro. Amen. Okay, Valerie, good morning. Nice to see you. And I love your yellow. Good sunshine.
Yes.
Sorry.
We're so happy you're here. Your shirt, the Starbucks cup, and Usher's shirt are all my
Yes.
points of yellow right now. It's making me
yeah.
very happy.
We need it.
Okay, so Miriam. Rachel gave a beautiful like summary of 2 key points in her life. And I think what I'm hoping to do is just weave in a little bit of more detail into some of those stories, and also an understanding. Really, like, you can't really get into her psyche, but like, if we could, if we could go back to Miriam and try to understand, like, what was this? Where did this come from? As you're going to see more towards a little bit later on, where she kind of speaks out of line, and she's held accountable for that, and where that comes from as well. So, like Rachel said, Miriam from the age of 5, which our commentaries tell us is not the same as a child today as 5, but not so much older. What I heard the Midrash is like equivalent to like a 10 or 12-year-old today. So she was a young child, and obviously she came from a home. We understand she was the brother of Moshe. She was the sister of Moshe and the sister of Aaron. She must have had very special parents. But to be able to, from such a young age, be able to just formulate these very strong opinions. And that really leads me to the first point, which is that never underestimate a child. You never know what a child, sometimes you hear a child saying something, or it's a certain perspective, or something that's strong. I happen to have one child who is extraordinarily intuitive. She's young. And I often have to like hit the brakes and really listen to what she's trying to say, because I often think like she's a child, but don't ever underestimate the power of a child. And that even from the young age, what a person believes and thinks needs to be cultivated, nurtured, watered, and nourished. Because if we're not paying attention to that mindset, it could go the opposite way. The fact that her father, whose name was Amram,
It's
that safe?
a dog. It's a dog.
Okay, got it. Did you see my face? Like, what are you about to choke on? The fact that her father was able to say, you know what? You are right. I am going to get back together with mom, gave her such strength to see that her opinions mattered. Her opinions were real. Okay. So before that, yes. Okay, so go take from that. Go take any. What's in the car? I can't go now. Go take something from that. No, you can't. I go to the car, but there's snacks there. There's cookies. We'll get one. The first time that we actually encounter her, even before all of this, well, actually, the first time after this encounter, she's known as a different name. And I'm going to quote to you the Torah. I apologize, guys. Thanks for working.
Can I get you a snack?
Just go get a snack, because I'm in the middle of trying to take.
Come here. Let me get you something.
Sure, then just wait. I'll be done soon before you know it. Okay? It's okay. The Torah tells us the king of Egypt, who was Paro, said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shifra and the other who was named Pua, every boy who is born, kill him, and let every girl live. It says over there, the midwives feared God and they let the children live. Okay? Immediately, the Talmud actually tells us that one of these women, who was actually Pua, is none other than Miriam. She was one of the midwives to these babies. So not only was she able to be instrumental, actually this does happen before, not only was she able to be instrumental to her own brother, but she, at such a young age, she was helping bring babies into this world. And she was somehow undercover, even while Paro had said that all of the baby boys should be killed. Her and this other woman, Shifra, who we learned was Yocheved, her mother, they were a mother-daughter duo. They were able to allow for these babies to live. Okay, so they were allowing these babies to be born. The Talmud teaches us that Yocheved was the one, she would weave blankets. She would sew together blankets and clothing, little baby clothing for these little babies. And Miriam was the one who used her voice to be able to calm down the children. That is what the Talmud actually tells us. Pua in Hebrew, actually, literally, Rashi tells us, talks about the word poo, poo, poo. It comes from the word like poo, 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 like calming down, like it's okay, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. And it's so beautiful because I think that you're going to see how as she gets older and she ends up becoming such a strong voice, you see from the time she was a young midwife, she was already using the power of her voice. And not only through her words, but also through the power of song. So Miriam, who oftentimes is known for the power of song and dance, we see that she started using that tool from the time that she was very young. Just this morning, I have a couple of Instagram channels that I'm part of. They're not even like, they're channels that are giving me exact news and exact like firsthand accounts. It actually makes me feel much calmer to see exactly what's going on in Jerusalem. One of the ladies that I follow, Meira, our daughter who's there now, actually just had the privilege to eat at her house 2 Friday nights ago. So I really feel like it's like in Meira's backyard. So seeing what's going on there through her, because my kid has no smartphone, is very calming to me. Anyway, so one of the accounts was talking about, so someone asked her, what are some of your strategies to keeping your families calm? Because this is as dramatic as it seems to us, I think it's even more dramatic. I actually think it's more dramatic. What's going on right now with how many times they have to run to the shelters, hold their kids in the middle of the night, they can't shower in peace. Like, this is not something that the people are being like, why are you being so dramatic? I actually think that it's like, we don't even realize how dramatic this is unless you're there. And so this mother said that she finds that the power of song is extremely grounding, and that every night she makes sure that she is singing to her children as they doze off. And she knows sometimes they're dozing off and they're going to be woken up in the next few minutes to a missile. She says she makes sure to sing to them as they go to sleep, and then to sing to them in the morning, the Moda'ani prayer when they wake up. And I was thinking, this is something that we really learned from Miriam. That from the time that she was bringing the babies into the world, she was already soothing them through the power of her voice. So that is such a beautiful idea. The word pua in Hebrew can also come from the Hebrew word hofea. Hofea means not omeid, not to stand, but to stand up. To stand up with an opinion and with strength. To use her voice also. So we're going to see as her voice is going to carry the whole way through the theme. But she stands up. She wasn't embarrassed of what other people might think or might say or might feel. And she was against, Moshe, Avram Avinu, our first Avraham from, Abraham. We know that he's called Avraham HaIvri because, which you translate as the Hebrew, but Ivri also comes from the word Aver, which means side, because he was able to jump over the side. Whatever everybody else was saying about him, I don't care. I'm choosing this side. This is for me. Miriam was the same way. She was able to stand up. She took a stance, and it didn't matter what everybody else was saying around her. I think something that has to be noted about Miriam is the fact that her name itself, does anybody know what the name Miriam actually means? Does it sound like any word that you might know? Okay, Mitzrayim is a good guess.
Mayim.
Okay, definitely has the word Mayim in there without the resh. The word Mar, think Pesach.
Maror.
Good, excellent. Maror.
She gave us a hint.
Yeah, exactly. Think Pesach, Maror. Miriam, we're going to see her connection to water soon, but Miriam actually stands for bitterness. Her name is bitter. Imagine naming your child bitter. That's what Miriam means.
Oh.
And the truth is that our sages actually teach us that she stood for this because of the time that she was born into. She literally was born into an Auschwitz. She never saw anything other than bitterness. She was born into destruction. She was born at a time like she didn't know of anything else. And still, she was one who took her bitterness, she took her pain, and she channeled it into something very powerful. I heard in the words of Rebbetzin Heller, she said there's a difference between Rebbetzin Sephora Heller. She said there's a difference between bitter and depression. And the way that she defined, how do you think she defined it? What is the difference between being bitter and being depressed?
One is sad and one is angry.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Use more verbs.
I'm thinking if you have the taste of bitter, you're more likely to look for something quickly that's sweeter to change.
Okay, exactly. And that's
If you're
actually,
depressed, you're just not going to do anything.
oh, that's exactly where Robinson Heller explains. She actually uses the example, if you were to accidentally put salt into your coffee and you're bitter and it tastes bitter and it's bitter, the first thing you do is you spit it out. Okay, you take a sip of that sugar, of that salt, and you spit out that bitter coffee. So bitter is actually coming from a place of action. You feel bitter, you turn it into action. Depression is complacency. Depression is a place of just hopelessness. Okay. So bitter, in Miriam's terminology, now when we think of her name and we think of bitter, we're thinking of a person who's taking the bitterness and turning it into something so magnificent. That's the power that Miriam had. The thing about Miriam is that it literally was a learned mindset. It was nothing that she ever saw with her own eyes. So, I read these books. I always talk about how some of my most powerful Holocaust books are the ones, Renee, the one you gave me actually, Lily's Promise. She focuses a long section there on the life before the war. The reason that I find these books so powerful is because it gives you a real taste of what they experienced and how the drastic shift, like bam, Miriam never tasted that life before the war. She didn't know, she couldn't even see it. She couldn't imagine what a brighter future actually looked like, which means that her muscle of envisioning, of thinking about what positive life could actually look like was uniquely strong. Because when you're born into something and that's your reality, how do you even know what air looks like? How do you know what it means to breathe? How do you know what it means to grow up in a place where you're not being annihilated, where the Egyptians are not coming to kill you, right? She didn't know of that. And the fact that she was still, as I'm going to go through her story now, but the fact that she was still able to hold on the entire time through this mindset of knowing, hold on, something is not going to be like this the whole time. Something is going to change. Something's going to shift. So I want to pause for just 1 second and focus right now where we find ourselves in this war. And everyone is affected by the war differently, some people more than others. But I guess I would ask that question, where does that come from? How can one tap into that vision of what will be, especially, so most of the people that we know are for sure us, we understand what life before the war has looked like. Where does one go when they start to have to get to that place of understanding what life could look like? Where does one go?
If they've never seen it before.
So I'm asking specifically if they can't, but also now for us practically speaking.
Like to our faith, to our.
Okay,
our
but even in terms of creativity, like how does one create that?
like what
Sure.
your personal action plan, I guess. of
Okay,
What you're going to do with those feelings, like acknowledging whatever we're feeling and knowing kind of, what does it look like for each of us? How do we take action?
okay, I love that PAP, personal action plan. I love that, Rachel. Beautiful. Yes, Rani.
Survival and hope.
Okay, survival and hope, right? Beautiful, beautiful words. Anything else come to mind? So I said the word before, creativity. I actually think that the mind, the imagination mind, is very, very powerful. And I think that being able to literally paint certain pictures in our mind that are positive, that are happy, that manifest like goodness is actually one of the most powerful tools that we have. When we're able to draw into, I think that we underestimate, from a Jewish perspective, we underestimate the power of the imagination. There are so many sages and books that are written about the power of the imagination, to be able to transform the place that you're in through the power of imagination.
Devorah.
In the last 2 years, we've experienced from the hostages, even just hearing them firsthand talking about, it was only through the power of the imagination how they were able to imagine what life is going to look like when they get out. It's extraordinarily strong. Yeah.
Your friend, what's her name? Edith Edgar? Am I saying
Yeah, my
that
friend
right?
Edith Eger. Yeah.
I think she said the only thing the Nazis couldn't take away from her was her mind. Your
Correct.
thoughts and your mind.
Beautiful. Yes.
Well, and in the Holocaust, they would sit around and talk about my grandmother, my cousin, she made the best blintzes or whatever, and they talked about food and they could conjure up the smell, the waft, the baking, the sharing of the activity. and that
Exactly.
Kept them, the idea of the food kept them alive. They had nothing to eat, but their thought nourished.
Yes, yes. In the same book, Lily's Promise, she talks about the recipes. They would like discuss these recipes. So now again, remember, Miriam didn't have those discussions. She didn't have that frame of reference. She didn't have that point to look to. And because she was such a deeply connected woman, and ultimately we see that she became a prophetess, she was able to jump to those pictures. So Miriam is really that idea of any personal difficulty that we're going through, to be able to know that our minds can control the result, that our minds have to bring us to that place of envisioning what the future is going to look like, what that end result, what that end game is going to look like. Okay, so that's the next piece about Miriam. Okay, the same way that we said that the word pua comes from that word hofea, to stand up, the Gemara actually tells us, well, actually, it's the word that is used that when she stood by to watch Moshe placed into that basket after the beautiful story that Rachel shared. So now you have this beautiful baby who's coasting along on the Nile, and you see this, and she sees this box. The word in the Torah that is used is vata'amod. Once again, you see that word of standing, that she stood. Okay, it doesn't say she watched; it says she stood. And the reason about standing once again over there is because she was so certain of her beliefs. She knew exactly what she was thinking about this baby, and she was focusing deeply, deeply on those beliefs. She was able to envision for this child is not going to continue in an Auschwitz. This child is going to have a brighter future. There will be something that is greater for this child. And ultimately, we know that she was actually privy to that gift, because when she was part of the process of Moshe being born, well, this actually happened before she saw the baby in the Nile, but it says that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was born, he filled the whole home with a special light, and she was able to see that light. And that light was able to provide her with the actual hope of the future.
She would have been the midwife, her mother's midwife.
She was, yeah, she was. She was one of the midwives. Yes, exactly.
As a young girl.
No, sorry. No, I don't know if she was actually a midwife or yeah, she must have been a midwife, because the Midrash says that she was able to see that light. Yes,
Wow.
she must have been. Yeah, yeah, she must have been. She must have been very young.
Yeah.
I just read that book, Educated. Did anyone ever read Educated? I'm thinking about like that, the way that she was teaching her daughter about being a midwife. Oh my gosh, it's just an interesting book.
Oh, it's crazy.
It's a crazy story. I can't say like I highly recommend it. It was an interesting read. Okay. Okay, so the Talmud actually tells us that there were 3 providers that stood up for Israel. Okay, Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. It is mind-boggling to think about what these parents must have instilled in these children. But the fact that Miriam was the only woman from here. So these 3 siblings, they have to somehow like balance each other out with that energy. You know, we first spoke about this idea of the spark, the sacred spark. We focused a lot on this idea of the feminine energy. But Moshe and Aaron were much more responsible for taking responsibility for teaching the men. That was the way, you know, men oftentimes they're going to connect more to men. Who was going to take responsibility for teaching the women? Miriam was the one who stepped up, and she was the one who connected with the women to teach them Torah. Again, I'm going to keep using the word Auschwitz just because I think it makes it practical for us to really think about what was going on. You're talking about real death camps, what was going on over there. And she was able to gather them, imagine little groups that would suddenly grow, and she would be able to spread wisdom and little Torah ideas. And because it was from woman to woman, she was able to deeply, deeply impact them. So the drips that she was giving them were what was literally anchoring them as they were going through their journey, as they were going through that time when they were in Egypt. The beautiful story that I think I must have shared so many times, but it has to be mentioned in the story of Miriam is I'm going to read to you the actual Gemara. Most of you are going to nod your heads. You remember the story, but it's such an important reminder. And it's the story of describing of when the tabernacle was being built. The Mishkan is being put up. The Mishkan was the portable temple. That was what they brought along with them when they were traveling through the desert, okay? And they have to make it and they have to all donate all of their different contributions to the Mishkan. And the Talmud tells us as following. The following. The Jewish women had mirrors which they used to adorn themselves, and they brought them as contributions to the tabernacle. God said, "These are dearer to me than everything, because through these the Jewish women bore many children in Egypt. When their husbands were exhausted from the toil of slavery, they would meet them with food and drink and decorate themselves with the mirrors. As a result, their husbands desired them, and they conceived and had children. As it says in Song of Songs, under the apple tree, I aroused you." So this is the very, very famous idea of how Moshe was collecting all the stuff, and the women come with their mirrors thinking, we're going to contribute these beautiful mirrors. And Moshe says, oh, no, don't bring those mirrors, guys. Those were used for like, you guys, messing around. Like, don't bring us those mirrors. And Hashem stopped Moshe and said, Chavivin alai. Those mirrors are so precious to me because that shows the strength of the Jewish woman. That shows that even when it was so terrible and the men had zero strength to go on, the women were able to use those as a tool to be able to connect and to inspire and to arouse their husbands. It's a mind-boggling thing. Where did they gain this strength from? None other than Miriam. Miriam was the one that was able to give these drips of strength. She was the one. Miriam infused them, and this was the survival. Okay. Then we move into the beautiful story, also the very famous story, and that is the story of the women with the tambourines. We've done programs on this. We've decorated our own tambourines. You know the drill. But Miriam, as we always ask, if you knew that you had to flee your house, you have 5 minutes to get out of there. What is your first thing that you are bringing?
Musical instruments.
And Miriam brought her tambourine. It's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling to think that as they're quickly having to get out of there, and she's like, I have one thing I got to go back in and bring. Not the photo album, not the cell phone, not anything else. Nothing else. She's like, we need to see ourselves on the other end dancing with this tambourine. We know that we will get there. We know that this is part of the journey. So the tambourine story is such a huge piece of who she was, being able to dispel the darkness with her belief in understanding what was yet to come. Because she was named Miriam and because her name meant bitterness, she was actually able to, be with and literally empathize with the Jewish people who were going through the bitterness. Her name was Miriam. Every time they spoke to her, it was like this, I get it. My name is Miriam. Of course I feel the bitterness. I'm born in this with you. I understand the depth of this yuck. Okay. Something very interesting about Miriam that you might not know is that when the Jewish people were traveling in the desert, there were 3 different signs that they were some of them were like just for the idea of it, but some of them actually helped them survive. So when they were traveling in the desert, they needed really 3 things. Does anybody know what were the 3 things that accompanied the Jewish people as they were traveling in the desert?
It was the cloud.
Good.
Cloud of Maror. Manna.
Okay, good.
And
Portable temple.
Okay, so the portable temple went with them, good, but it wasn't considered a miracle. So we have 2. We have the cloud, okay, a cloud that was a cloud at day and a pillar of fire at night. That represented the godliness that was over the Jewish people. God is always with them. We have the manna, so they were provided with food to be able to eat. And there's one other thing.
Water.
Good. Through what? How did it show up?
The well.
Good. Excellent. There was somehow a portable well, okay, that provided water for them in the desert, okay? Now we are told that it was in the merit of Miriam now it goes to your word mayim, that the Jewish people were actually able to receive that water. And we see that as soon as Miriam passed away, the well dried up. It was no longer providing for the Jewish people. What is the connection between water and Miriam? There are multiple. If you know anything about water, pull out your Four Elements book stuff. But what do you think the connection between water and Miriam would be?
The Nile,
What about the Nile?
but she was there with Moshe Rabbeinu when he was in the
Excellent,
Passover.
excellent. She stood at the water and was able to save Moshe through the water. Excellent. That is number one. Good. What else?
At the parting of the sea.
Okay, excellent. Connected to the same idea that she was able to witness the splitting of the sea and she brought her tambourine. Good. Any other ideas? We are told that Torah is compared to water. The same way that one cannot live without water, one cannot live without Torah. And because Miriam was the messenger, she was the one who was able to infuse the Jewish people, especially the Jewish women, with the Torah itself. She stood for being able to merit to give the Jewish people water, okay? Water is something, it's interesting. Torah has different analogies. It's compared to different things. But if you think about it, water provides so many different things. It nourishes, it quenches, it can feel good when one can go bathe in water or shower in water. There are so many things that you would, when you think about the comparisons between Torah and between water, that you can understand. When one is connected, and that water is a source, right? Water comes, there's a source of water. Like it's coming, it's usually stemming from somewhere and it spreads to other places. The same way with Torah, how it's the source of so much life. So when we think about that and we think that Miriam was able to provide us with all of that, so of course she was the one who merited that she was able to provide the Jewish people with water, which was a total miracle because they were traveling in the desert. It made no sense that they had water. And it was in her merit that they got that water. There's one other connection that has to do with water and Miriam. Can anyone think about it? You need water? There's water right there. Yeah.
Drink it with your mouth. I think
Okay.
That's gonna relate to later with her.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I didn't see that answer anywhere, but that's interesting. She used her mouth. Okay.
What?
Like, you know, a little bit later.
Right. How she's going to use her words. Right. Exactly. So in the four, okay.
We use it to purify ourselves.
Okay. True. Like the source of a mikvah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking there's a cleansing, and I don't know if this connects to her, but
Right.
to me, there's a cleansing aspect that water enables us to like clean,
Yes.
get clean. And I feel like sometimes that with Torah, like I feel like after I come to class, I
It
feel
feels cleansing.
like cleaner, that I'm just sort of like realigned with what matters.
I love that.
Beautiful.
So that's actually so beautifully said. I was going to express it a little bit differently, but I wonder if it's connected the same way. Because we know, so my husband wrote these books on the four elements. So I see everything in the four elements now. But from that standpoint of the four elements, water is connected to the emotional realm of a human. It's connected to the emotions. And Miriam was super, super in tune with the emotional need of the Jewish people during that time. She understood exactly what she needed. The reason that she was known to be a leader, have you ever had a leader or even a camp counselor or a teacher of somebody who is a great teacher, but totally doesn't get you? Like completely like, hello, like you do not understand me. Like, I don't know. I've had teachers like that. Like, it's good. I appreciate the information that they've imparted on me, but like, there's zero emotional connection.
You know what
Okay.
else? Doctors.
Oh
Yeah.
my
I
gosh.
just was talking to somebody who was so frustrated with her doctor, such a great doctor, and didn't get the emotions.
It's so
Really?
sad. It's so sad. You would think that there would be part of the training, but like I hear more and more stories about like these horrible bedside manners. It's so, a lot of it comes from
And it's
ego.
hard to heal the body if you don't heal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, good
Yeah,
point, Kate.
definitely.
Good point.
For water and the Torah and the learning of it, you know, there's sometimes just a drip, there's just a drop, but sometimes there's the with either the hurricane or the waterfall, and there's so much there and we need so much. And other times you just like need the washcloth to like wet and be done. And we learn Torah a little bit at a time, and sometimes we get this like aha moment that's like overwhelming and we just understand.
Love that analogy. Beautiful. I like the washcloth hurricane. Very poetic from the poet herself. But back to the emotions, what we're saying is that because Miriam was this kind of leader who tapped into the emotional level of the Jewish people, the resource that she was able to provide was the element that represented the emotional connection, the water, which really touches about that deep emotional connection. Okay. Moving into the next interesting thing about Miriam.
I think that does connect to the cleansing.
I think so also. I
Because
think
to me,
there is a
it's
connection.
a more elevated way of saying cleansing, but like that's how I feel like when we would be in class and it's like, oh, there was like, it's like cleansing the emotional, like
A refresh.
jumble.
Yeah, no, I think it is very interesting. I think also what you're referencing is the concept of a mikvah,
Yeah.
right? Like it's not like we
Yeah.
have to go into a sauna.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the concept of air is not
Totally.
what's refreshing us.
Totally.
It's literally water. So I will share with you that my husband and I just got away for a few days right before this war. Thank you, Hashem, that it was before this war, because I don't think I would have been able to go if it was during the war. We got away, and I successfully did an ice plunge. And I have to tell you that there was something so. Has anyone here done it?
Oh, it's the best.
Then you've done it.
Obsessed.
You've done it.
Obsessed.
I've done
Okay.
it.
Oh my gosh. So, but again, water.
Yeah.
Like, I was also in the sauna. I was also in the schwitz. But then when you go into that, like water, and okay, we could talk about the fact that it was freezing cold another time. I'm sure it will come up in other classes. But there was something and it wasn't a mikvah. It's not a mikvah. It didn't come from like a spiritual cleansing, but there is something so powerful about just going into the water. So for what it's worth. Okay. Okay, so something very interesting in this past week's Parsha, actually, in Parshat Bahalotcha, which is, I taught a class in our synagogue this past Shabbos, and I had prepared for it a couple of weeks ago, opening up the Chumash, reading it through. I was like, this is such a fascinating Parsha. And then the war breaks out, and I reread the Chumash, and I have tears streaming down my cheeks, because when you're in a certain circumstance and you read the Torah, that you always talk about how, depending on what's going on, you see it through a different pair of eyes. Suddenly, the whole Torah portion meant something so different to me, and it is actually so devastating, because the entire Torah portion of last week talks about how Moshe, he was right there. He was 3 days away. In his mind, we got 3 days to journey, and the Jewish people are in the land. We make it into that land of Israel. But one pitfall, and the next pitfall, and the next pitfall. And unfortunately, Moshe was not so in touch and in tune at that moment. He was like ahead of where the people were at. They're busy complaining, and they're busy being negative. They're busy, and it held them back. And ultimately, we know that it led to a very big rerouting, where Moshe himself doesn't even get to enter the lands of Israel. At the end of last week's Parsha, we see a very interesting thing. And I have to preface this little anecdote by saying the story in the Torah by saying that we have to understand something that I always have to say before any one of our ancestors make a mistake. And that is that Hashem judges righteous people like the breadth of a string. He looks under a microscope and judges them extraordinarily harsh, because when I'm going to tell you what happened to Miriam, it's going to sound harsh, and you're going to say, what? Like she was put. Okay, but anytime you're going to say Moshe wasn't able to enter the lands of Israel because of what? Like, what in the world? Like, that seems so harsh. So we have to understand that the way that I'm judged ain't the same way that Moses is judged, like it just doesn't equate. So Miriam is actually held accountable in last week's Torah portion for speaking Lashon Hara. She's held accountable for speaking gossip, which is the first time that we see that Miriam erred. We really see that this was a mistake. Now, the beauty of our Torah is that it shows us the mistakes. If we didn't see anything negative about Miriam in the whole Torah, maybe we wouldn't be able to relate to her as much. Maybe we would just think she was holier than thou. She's a woman who's born into prophecy, and she just,
Perfect.
easy for her to be perfect, right? But the Torah doesn't. It shows us where she goofed, and it shows us her mistake. And I think for that we have to be grateful, because it shows us her humanity. The way the way that the Lashon Hara came about is that it said that her and Aaron, her brother, are standing outside of the camp, and they're chatting. They're having a conversation. And this conversation, the nature of it was one that was negative about their brother Moshe. And I'm going to quote to you what the Torah actually says. In last week's parsha, it tells us Miriam spoke with Aaron about Moshe regarding the Cushite woman whom he had married. Now, again, it seems outrageous. These words were told. He spoke about the Cushite woman that Moshe had married. He's speaking about Moshe. He's speaking about this woman. Like, what's going on?
This is the brother speaking about it?
This is Miriam and Aaron
The brother.
speaking about Moshe and his wife. It doesn't actually say the name of his wife. All it tells us is that it's the Cushite woman. Cushite, actually, I looked into this for my class, but Cushite actually can mean black. It can mean Ethiopian, or it could just mean a woman from the Kushi, like the place that she's from, Kush, which is probably Ethiopia. It's not clear if it's the wife Zipporah, if it was the other wife, whatever it
He had
is.
more than one wife?
Yes, he had more than one wife, but whatever it is, it is not clear who it was about. That I just want to say.
Yeah.
Whatever it was, what are they gossiping about? Okay. So I'm going to tell it to you the way that it sounds harsh, and then I'm going to tell you what I understand what she was really saying. The way that it sounds harsh is that they seem to be very, I'm gonna read it to you. Miriam said, "Has God only spoken to Moses?" She noticed that Moshe had to separate from his wife. The irony of the story, you're going to see now why it's going to go back to Rachel's initial story. Moshe is going to separate from his wife, and she's upset. She's upset. She doesn't like separation of spouses over here. She wants spouses to be together. So she says, "Has God only spoken to Moshe? Hasn't God spoken to us as well?" She says to her brother Aaron. God heard, and God came down in a pillar of a cloud and stood at the opening of the tent and called, "Aaron, Miriam." They both came, and he said, "My servant Moshe is not like the other prophets. In all of my house, he is loyal, panim el panim, face to face. Do I speak with him? Why did you not fear speaking about my servant Moshe?" So she starts, in the way that she was judged, she's held accountable for Lashon Hara, for gossip, for slandering. Miriam says to Aaron, "I don't understand. We're also prophets. Why does he have to separate from his wife? We don't separate from our spouses. Why does he have to separate from his wife? I don't agree that he should have separated from his wife." At which point, Hashem comes down and has to explain to them, and this is where she's held accountable. Like, did you not realize that you weren't the same as your brother Moshe? I speak to Moshe. In Aramaic, it's called aspaklaria me'ira, which means in clear vision, face to face. Moshe was really the only prophet that got this level of interaction with the Almighty. Hence the fact that you know that he was up on some high level up there for 40 days and nights without food or drink, having a conversation with God, right? Like, this is superhuman. This is not a normal thing. Miriam and Aaron, they had some kind of prophecy, but not the same way as Moshe. And at this point, Hashem has to give rebuke to Miriam and say, "You really had no right to speak down. First of all, you're equating him to you, which in and of itself is a flaw. He's not the same as you. He's on a higher level. And second of all, who are you to look down on those actions?" There was a certain time where Moshe actually did have to separate from his wife because he had to be ready for this clear vision. There were not many prophets that were on that level, but they were not allowed to have intimacy with their spouses when they needed to be on call for that level of connection with God. And she slanders and she speaks badly. And what the Torah actually tells us is that she is punished. For a full week, she breaks out in leprosy all over her body. Now we know in Parshas Mitzorah, which is before, we know that the sin of gossip which we are all guilty of all the time. The sin of gossip back then had such ramifications on their physical body that if they spoke badly, there were different levels of leprosy that would come upon their body. It would be a spot, it would grow, sometimes it would grow to their clothing, sometimes it would end up affecting their house. If it had one hair, if it had two hairs, it's kind of disgusting actually, but actually so powerful to realize that they were on such levels that the material that was coming out of their mouth manifested itself in their physical body.
And then everyone else could see it.
And then it was seen and it also spread. It spread. Okay. The reason that Mitzorah in Parshat Mitzorah that we see they had to go into isolation, literally pandemic. Okay. They had to go into isolation. They had to go into their own place so that they could do teshuvah, they could apologize, they could reflect, and then slowly, this leprosy would leave their body. But exactly what Valerie is saying, it was very humiliating because it would be a public thing that people would know about. So Miriam was then stricken with leprosy and she's put into isolation. And the Torah actually tells us that they were in the middle of traveling. There was the whole travel. The entire Jewish people waited. They put their entire travel on hold for an entire week so that she wouldn't have to suffer in isolation and slowly catch up a week later. That was her reward. So over here, you see a story with Miriam that you see the punishment, but in the punishment, you see the cushion. You see the reward right there. Why? Our commentaries ask why. Why was she rewarded this way? Because of the way that she interacted with the Jewish women, because of the Torah that she taught and gave over to the Jewish women, because of the emotional investment that she had in the Jewish women, and because of her faith that she held on to, that she was believing that there was a better future for the Jewish women, for the Jewish people, they all waited. They didn't just let her go, let them all go. They waited for her while her leprosy actually did heal. So I don't know. I think this story of Miriam, it is fascinating because you might think that on her level, she would be able to say, of course he's doing what's right. Of course I trust that my brother Moshe, he's somebody who speaks face to face with God. Of course he's doing what he's doing. But then we have to go back to story number 1 and we have to see, where was Miriam rooted?
Strong conviction.
She was rooted with her convictions of her own, and she was rooted in connection and a better future for the Jewish people. For her, separation of a husband and wife was very painful. She didn't want to see that. So it reflected itself in the words that she spoke harshly about it. She didn't really mean to speak harshly. She just felt like, no. How can we do this? We don't have to separate. Why should he have to separate? She was coming out of a place of no, we have to keep this family together. It was coming from that place, but it manifested in itself, which was disrespectful to Moshe, which ultimately we see was actually disrespectful to Hashem.
Can I ask you something?
Yes.
Since you just brought it up and it might be a little.
Yes,
off
go
topic,
ahead.
But so she was married? Do we know anything about?
We do
that?
not know a lot about her husband, but she was married. We know very little about the husband of Miriam. Very
Or
little.
her children?
It's actually very little. I think their names are mentioned in the Torah, but we don't know a lot about them. It's actually very interesting. And even I just was reading this when I was preparing this past week's Parsha, Miriam and Aaron's children, they're at least mentioned and they're discussed. I have to see, if I thought for 1 second, I probably could even remember who they were. Yes, I know exactly who they were. I know Aaron's sons. Who are Miriam's sons? Okay, I don't know. I'm gonna have to look it up who they were. It's probably gonna be ding, 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 da, should have known that, but okay. But our Moshe's sons, who were Gershom and Merari, they're spoken about differently.
Yeah.
It's they're off to the side. Moshe's children don't make headlines.
I've never even heard
It's
of them.
really interesting.
Never
And
heard
to
them.
that point, we really see that Moshe's mission in this world was dedicated more to the Jewish people as a whole than to his own family. And you see the fact that he had to separate from his wife as the point in case. You know what I'm saying? You see it, the fact that he was willing to make that sacrifice for being able to converse with God on that level. The
But it
Jewish people
sounds-
were really his children.
But it sounds like none of their children were really.
No, but they are.
highlighted.
They are more for sure. Listen, our own sons for sure were Nadav and Avihu. There's a whole huge parsha on them. Miriam, I'm literally drawing a blank, but I'm also sure that they're in there. They at least make some noise. Moshe's children, not so much. There's not really any noise about them at all.
And this whole story that you just told was
Yeah.
in the Torah portion about her with the Lashon Hora and all of that was in the Torah.
This was this Pax Week's Parsha. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, this is all in this Pax Week's Parsha. I want to just end off with reading you about the well, and then we can stop. But I just want to read to you about the well inside. It says, when the Jewish people, good to see you, Nancy. We should hear good news for all the Jewish people. When the Jewish people were in the desert, the well stood beside the tent of meeting, and the officers of Israel dug a stream leading to their tribes, just so you can envision what this looked like. Then the more generous leaders dug smaller streams to cut down the inconvenience and allow the water to flow directly to their families. So if we're thinking of actual physical well traveling, again, it has to do more with the source of where the water was coming through. It was divine providence that the water would only flow towards someone who was generous, because water is a specific reward for kindness. So this also speaks about that emotional connection. This is another layer to the well of Miriam's kindness. The way that she treated other people, the way that she would empathize with the women, the stories that are told again in the Talmud and the Midrash, but just about how she would listen to their woes. She also had her own woes. Again, she was born to Auschwitz. She had her own woes also, but she was able to be there for the Jewish people. So she was a provider. I'm going to stop here, but she was a provider. She was a prophetess. And she is our foremother who, when we think about going through hard times on a personal level, because I heard someone say this morning, like, just because you broke your foot doesn't mean my sprained ankle is not hurting. And like, it's very true. Like, while there's very big issues going on, it doesn't mean that there's not individual pain and individual issues. And everybody has a right. Like, we all have a right. So whenever we're going through an individual issue or a global issue or on a national level, whatever it is, we have the power, ma'aminim, b'nei ma'aminim. We are believers, the children of believers. We have it inside of us. This is the time that we have to dig deep, tap into that strength that Miriam offers. And I'll end with a blessing that, especially now during this time with this war going on in Israel, with scary, unprecedented times, that we have the ability to use the power of our imaginations to know that there is a better, brighter future for the Jewish people and for the world. And we should see that very speedily in our days. Amen.
Amen. Beautiful. Thank you.
I'm just stopping the recording. Sorry, guys.
I'd like to share something else.
Yes, open for comments and thank